Today, I want to talk to you about today I want to talk to you about oh, don't you hate it when that happens? You're about ready to get up and give a speech up there, you're ready to go, and all of a sudden you forget what you're going to say. Have you had that happen? You seen that happen on stage? Pretty embarrassing, right? Awkward, difficult, yeah. Have you ever had it happen to you? If you've ever had it happen to you, where you get up on stage and you suddenly lose everything, you know that it's one of the toughest things there is. And it happened to me a while back. And I got up there on stage and I just was kind of like, well, my next point is, I didn't want to say to the audience, give me a hint. But I was this close to doing it. Afterwards, a friend of mine, Bob, a blonde-haired guy, professional speaker, really knows his stuff, came up to me and said, Tim, you seem to be having a little trouble there on stage. Yeah, Bob, I was kind of forgetting what I was going to say. Hey, Tim, it happens to everybody, but tell you what, here's simple things you can do. I got several tips for you. Make sure it doesn't happen again. And then Bob told me some really great things. Really great things to help me remember things, to make sure I know what's going on. And today, that's what I want to share with you. So I want you to learn, because you go up there on stage and you forget something, it's really difficult. Ever been in that situation? Doesn't need to happen. So Bob shared some really great things with me, some great tips where I thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And he said it in such a way, it was so easy for me to understand. I got it. You ever have that happen where you just get it? I got it. And I thought, this is really useful. I want to make sure other people have this information too. So today, I want you to have this information so you understand what's going on up there. Because quite often, you get in a situation and you don't remember it, especially if you're a speaking situation, it just causes a lot of problems. Today, you're going to find out about the way to remember things, different ways to remember things, because different people will find different methods of remembering work best for them. We're different. We have different ways we behave, different ways we do things. That's understandable. And you have a way that works best for you for remembering things. And if you aren't using that way, then you don't get it. You don't understand. You get up on stage, you forget what the heck you're going to say. You don't know why. And yet, if you use these simple things, these simple techniques, you will be able to understand. You will be able to retain it. You will be able to get it. You'll think, ah, that's how it works. The secret is, make sure you use the way that works best for you. So you're going to learn about 3 different ways to remember things on stage. And maybe you hear one and you think, it doesn't work for me. That's not going to happen for me. That's fine. Keep listening. There are other ways that work. One of these 3 ways will work. It doesn't work if you don't practice it. Don't practice it, nothing happens. But if you do practice these different ways, seeing which one works best for you, you're going to much better remember what's going on up there. You're going to have a sharper mind, a quicker understanding of things. You're going to really know what's going on when you're giving your speech. Become much more aware of your surroundings and much more aware of your audience. Because instead of focusing so much on how to remember this stuff, you'll focus out there in the audience, be better able to connect with the audience. So you ready? All right, let's go with the first great way to remember your speech. The first method of remembering a speech is something that if you don't use this method, maybe it's because you aren't somebody who really has a kind of a way of thinking, a visual way of thinking. If you don't have a visual way of thinking, this way probably isn't going to work for you. But if you are a visual thinker, and you really do think about things in your mind, this way of memorization will be very effective for you. And when you use it, you'll discover that it really does help everything to kind of flow and come into your mind, just because if you're a visual thinker, this really works well. And the first method of memorizing things is impression. Impression. What that means is you want to press into your mind the thing that you're trying to remember. It's, if you've ever seen cookie cutters and how you lay out the dough, squish out the dough flat, and then you push the cookie cutter into the dough, it's like that. It makes an impression. It cuts everything out. A shape comes out of the dough because of that impression the cookie cutter makes into the dough. If you don't make homemade cookies, perhaps you have no idea what I'm talking about. Look up cookie cutter on the net, check it out, let's see how it works. You lay out the dough flat, you have these little metal things that you push into the dough. When you push them into the dough, then they cut shapes. And so whereas you just have all this flat dough, if you make that impression, suddenly all these shapes start to appear in the dough. And it's the same thing with your mind, particularly as mentioned if you happen to be a visual person. A person who sees things very clearly and brightly in your mind, the impression system can work well. And what you do is you simply think through your speech in your mind, beginning to end. Just think it through. It's okay to read it, but when you read it, think about it. Okay, here I am presenting this speech, or here's the first part of it. You're going through it. Get that impression of that speech in your mind. See the audience in front of you as you're reading it. See the reaction of the audience in front of you as you read it. See how they're encouraging. They want you to come up there. And just read through with a really intent awareness. Impression only works if you're very intently aware. Because remember, just like with the cookie cutters into the dough, you need to press hard enough that something is left behind. If you just make a little bit of a thought, it's like if you took that cookie cutter and just laid it on top of the dough without pushing down on it. You don't push down on it, nothing happens. So to make the impression system work, to really push down on that idea in your mind, really focus. As you're going through your story, really be intensely aware of the words, how the words relate to each other. Let that story sink into your mind. And as it sinks into your mind, you see that audience out in front of you. You see the audience enjoying the story. Get into that. Get into that whole feeling. You may want to first read the thing out loud and then read it to yourself and really see it in your mind. Not only the words, but more importantly the actions. If it's a story, what's going on in the story, what's happening in the story. See that story occurring in your mind. And that will make the deep impression you need so when you get up on stage, all of a sudden, boom, the whole thing comes in your mind. You have this bright visual awareness of your speech, of what's going on in your speech. And this visual awareness, this impression, will help you as you go through to make sure that it works out. To make sure that you stay within your speech and you get that point across. So when you have that moment where you might forget something, the impression is so vivid, it just kind of carries you into the next part. You have this vivid awareness, oh, that's what I want. Because it's like a beacon in your mind. It's like a lighthouse in your mind, just shining brightly. You can't forget it because it's so deeply impressed. It's like that cookie cutter in the dough. You press that cookie cutter in the dough. The shape is there in the dough. You can't get rid of it. It's there in the dough. Once you put the cookie cutter into the dough, that's where it is. That's the impression method. And if you're visual, that can work very well for you. But if you're somebody who isn't necessarily visual, there's another method that might work better and doesn't take so much mental strain. Impression's a great method, a great way to remember things. No question about it. Impression is fine, but maybe impression doesn't quite do it for you, or it takes too much mental energy to visualize all that stuff. That's all right. There's another method. Now, if you don't like to work on things, then this could be a bit of a problem, because this method does take a little bit of work. A little bit of work, but also a constant bit of work. So that's not your thing. Maybe this won't work for you. But if you can do just a little bit of work, just a little bit of effort, this method can pay off hugely with very little effort, even if you don't have the mental interest in really focusing and getting this impression things. This method can work instead. And that is repetition. Repetition. Some of you are old enough to remember a thing called records. You know who you are. For you who aren't old enough to know what records are, it used to be that the way you played back recorded things was on records. And these records would literally have a groove dug into a sheet of plastic. And this groove would go all the way around, and a device with a needle would sit in that groove. And it would then follow that groove all the way around. So the needle would stay in one place, and the plastic would spin underneath it, and it would simply sit in the groove, and coming out of the groove would be certain bumps, and those bumps would eventually communicate to the needle, which came out of the speakers. And if you're really confused now, look it up. Not making it up. This is the way that things used to be played. This is how the audio systems used to work. These things called records. And records, I mentioned, had these grooves in them. The thing about it is that you could play, once you had everything, these grooves in there, that's how the record played. So you'd play it, and then of course the same grooves, the same result would come out of it. Just as there are these grooves on a record, so you can also create kind of grooves in your mind through repetition. You think about it, when you go through your speech, it's like you got a kind of a bad recording. You sort of recorded it, it's a little bit fuzzy, you can't hear all the details in it. When you play it back in your mind, it's not quite clear. But as you go over and over it again, those grooves in the record in your mind become deeper and clearer. And that's simple repetition. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, I don't want to do all this work of repetition. I want to go up there and do my speech like 20 times every day. I don't have time to do that stuff. That's fine. Good news is, to do repetition, you don't need to do it 20 times a day. Just do your speech once. Once is fine. You got a 10-minute speech, every day just do that 10-minute speech once. After a week, hey, that's 7 times you've done the speech. 2 weeks, 14 times. 3 weeks, 21 times, I think. Yeah, going with it, 21 times. Repetition, just every day, repeat it. You might be thinking, wait a minute, Tim, I got a half-hour speech to do here. I don't want to do that every day, half an hour. That's fine. Just do 5 minutes of it every day. 5 minutes, by the end of a week, you've done basically the whole speech. You've done more than the whole speech. Just keep doing that. Repetition. Repeat it over and over again. As you repeat it over and over again, it gets those grooves deeper and deeper. As the grooves get deeper and deeper, it sinks deeper into your mind. And eventually, if you've done this speech 30, 40, 50 times, you're not going to forget it. You can't forget it. It's like a record that has these grooves in it. There's no way to unrecord that. That's permanently recorded. It's something you're going to remember. You get up on stage, doesn't matter. It's in the grooves, it's in the record, you're going to remember it. That's the power of repetition. Again, not a big deal. You just have to do something and keep working on it. Still haven't come up with a winner yet? Don't worry. There's one more way for you to easily remember your speech. At this point, you might be thinking, Tim, I don't know, the idea of impression doesn't really work for me, and I'm not too keen about repetition. So, what else you got? I get it, it's all right. One last method. Now, if you didn't like the other methods, there is going to be some work involved. Pretty much, if you're going to remember anything, there is some work involved. So you don't want to do any work, of course, it's going to be difficult to remember things. But if you're willing to do just a little bit of work, this final method probably will be the simplest, the most effective, most useful, most engaging of them all. And that method is association. Association. Different from impression, where you get this kind of overall picture of everything, and even repetition, where you go over and over things. Association is where you use your environment, everything around you, to remind you of your speech. So, where you stand, how you stand, what you're doing. Each one of these forms a kind of a reminder, a cue of the next part of your speech. You can have different places on stage for which you stand to make different points. That's a simple method of association. Okay, stand here, I'm going to talk about one point, great. Finish that point, I'm going to stand here, fine. Third point, I'm going to stand over there. When I sum things up, I'll be in the middle. Step towards the audience, step back from the audience. All of these are methods of association. Body association. You associate body movements with different parts of your speech. So instead of just remembering your whole speech, you just remember, okay, I'm over here. Ah, I know what part of the speech that is. I'm over here. I know what part of the speech that is. So as you go through your speech from the very beginning, you start associating your speech with different parts of the stage. So when you come to that part of the stage, automatically it cues you into, oh, that's what the next part is. The great thing about using environment cues such as that is that it's already there. The stage is already there. The places on the stage are already there, so you can't lose them or misplace them. It's not going to happen. It's always going to be a first spot, a second spot, and a third spot on the stage. So when you get to those spots, you'll remember. Because by practicing, a little bit of repetition there, by going through the thing and associating with those different parts of the stage, it helps you remember. That's the power of association. And it may be some places you remember because you've got a very strong speech. Okay, I've got the strong speech. I'm at this point in my presentation. That's the strong part. Okay. Maybe I've got a little bit quieter voice here. All right, well, that's a different part of my presentation. And the great thing about association is everything around you cues you in and helps you remember. As you do your speech, it guides you to where you should be on the stage and how you should be talking. And as you start talking and moving on the stage, that cues you in on where you should be in your speech. That's association. And if impression doesn't work for you, repetition doesn't work for you, just getting out on the stage, getting familiar with the stage, the different parts of the stage, which parts of the stage best work, which parts of the stage naturally go with that part of the speech, that'll be very, very useful. Then when you get up on stage, say, oh, okay, I'm standing here. I know what that part is. I'm standing in this spot. I know what that spot's about. So you don't think, oh, what am I talking about? You just say, well, I'm standing here. I'm talking about the thing that goes with this spot in the stage. I'm standing over here. I've moved on from that point. Now I'm over to this point. Association can be very, very powerful. Now to wrap up all the things you've learned today, all the different methods you've learned today of keeping that speech in your mind. One method is impression. And if you're a particularly visual person, impression may work very well for you. All impression is you get an impression of the speech. You get the speech pressed into your mind. Just like if you're making cookies, you have the cookie dough out and you have the cookie cutter and you press the cookie cutter into the cookie dough and you have these impressions that are left behind. The great thing about the impression system is once you have these strong sense in your mind of what's going on, a very visual awareness of things, then you have a very strong sense of your speech. You're much less likely to forget it because just like the shapes in the cookie dough, they're permanent. They're there. They're not going anywhere. That impression stays. If impression doesn't work for you, maybe repetition will work better. Repetition, where you say something again and again. Doesn't need to be a big deal. You can simply practice every day, but 5 minutes a day. Don't go crazy. Just 5 minutes every day getting up there, practicing, working in your speech will help you remember it. Just like with the old-fashioned records that had that groove in them from which they were able to, all the music came out of it. So you're cutting a groove into your mind. And just like a record will always play the same thing back from that groove that's cut into it. So if you cut the groove in your mind, you will always play back that same speech because it's so well cut into your mind, you can't forget it. You've been going over and over, you're repeating it. There's repetition going on, and then, of course I know that. And if impression and repetition don't work, last method, think about, is to do things by association. Associate different places on the stage with different parts of the speech. Associate different vocal variety with different parts of the speech. So instead of just trying to remember the speech as a whole, you just associate particular parts with particular parts on the stage. And you just remember, okay, when I'm standing here, I've got this part. I stand here, I say this part. I stand here, I say this part. And as you do the speech, work through that association. So when you're standing on that part of the stage, it keys it in. You say, I know what goes here. You're standing in that part of the stage. Oh, I know what goes there. Association. Great way to remember your speech. Now maybe you've never had that problem of being out there on stage and forgetting your speech. And you're thinking, Tim, I don't forget my speeches. Never happened. So I don't need your impression, I don't need your repetition, I don't need your association, I need any of that stuff when I'm out there on stage. I say, fine, great. And you'll be fine until you do forget something. Because there comes a moment where you're standing there on stage and you're thinking, what if I forgot it? And then you do. Unless you have a strong impression in your mind of the speech and you're strongly aware of it. Or you've been going over and over again, so you're repeating it, or you have some sort of association with different things in different places in the stage mean different things. Using these three methods, you can be large and in charge of the stage. So you really know what's going on. You don't waste your time up there stumbling and fumbling. No problem. You know. Simple process, 3 different methods. Choose the one that works best for you, or use all 3. And you start to enjoy being up there knowing that everything's okay. It's all right. It's fine. You can take a pause and not be afraid that that pause will go on way too long because you've forgotten what you're going to say. It's challenging getting up there and speaking, and one of the scariest things to do is to go up there and forget what you're going to say. But don't worry. Use just one of these 3 methods. And whenever you go out on stage, you'll always have something to say. You'll always be confident, informed, and in charge.